We were one of the first two companies to implement a nationwide network-based point of service plan, which was very disruptive at the time. It was moving away from indemnity and moving into managed care.
Welcome to Broken Benefits. I'm your host, Lee Lewis, and this is a podcast where we learn from top employer experts on how to fix our broken benefits to save lives, save dollars, and save your talent. Welcome back, everyone, to Broken Benefits. I am your host, Lee Lewis, and today's guest is Brian Marcotte. Brian ran benefits for a little over 2 decades for Honeywell, one of the larger employers in the United States, and is responsible during that time for a health plan that covered over 150,000 lives and was spending over $500 million annually. And during the height of his tenure, he went for 7 straight years with absolutely flat trend during the absolute highest period of our industry's history on trend, excluding 2022. Anyway, super excited to bring him here. Brian, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Lewis. Great to spend some time.
Absolutely. So I want to start a little bit, maybe tell us a little bit of your story of some of the high points that occurred during your time managing benefits at Honeywell.
Actually, I'd start with one before even Honeywell.
Oh, okay, that's great.
I was at Marriott before Honeywell for 4.5 years. I said, Lewis, I'm sorry, it's Lee. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good.
You gotta get 2 first names. You gotta deal with that. When I came to Marriott, they were very interested in implementing managed care. Now we're talking like 1990, and we were one of the first 2 companies to implement a nationwide network-based point of service plan, which was very disruptive at the time. It was moving away from indemnity and moving into managed care, and doing it on a national basis, every single market, every single employee, every business line, was probably one of the biggest challenges I've ever had. And it got a lot of attention at the time because it was groundbreaking. Allied Signal, ironically, was the first company to do that on a nationwide basis, and that's where I ended up. If you know the story, Allied Signal bought Honeywell, took the Honeywell name eventually, but I ended up going from Marriott to Allied Signal at one point. But I would say that was the first thing that I did that was impactful, both from a cost perspective and employee relations perspective, provider relations perspective, because providers were very reluctant to go into networks at that time. And that was huge and pretty significant before I even went to Honeywell.
Everyone, now just a quick word from today's sponsor.
Hey, Dad, have you seen my PlayStation?
People who work for companies just like yours are desperate for any way to pay their medical debt. Support your employees by giving them 100% medical coverage with Catalyze Health.
Now, how did you go about discovering that strategy and then figuring out how you'd bring it to bear?
We worked with a consultant, and actually a consultant who is still a very good friend of mine. We forged that relationship back in the day, Sid Stoltz. And Sid and I, he was working for Towers Perrin at the time. And if you think about technology back then, right, going to dark ages, we mapped out every single market using pins on a map in terms of distance to providers, and trying to make sure that the network adequacy was in place. It was the only way we could do it. We'd look at the addresses of providers and we'd pinpoint them on a map to make sure that we could roll this network out and be confident that we had coverage for all of our employees in each of the markets we were rolling out in. The biggest challenge was changing providers. This was, again, your first shot at it. You get an in-network benefit and you get an out-of-network benefit. And if you use out-of-network providers, and if you don't go through your PCP, because this was a gatekeeper model, you had to have a PCP. Everything's paid out of network. So, I would come in the morning and I would have a stack of those pink sheets from my secretary with somebody calling me. Each morning there'd be a stack of people who wanted to call back to give me a hard time about what we were doing. And,
Wow.
you really had to forge ahead. We did a road show, every single major market, presenting to all of the business leaders um, and HR people what we were doing and why we were doing it. And the change management that went into this was just incredible. And
Mm,
of course, we had some bumps because this really hadn't been done too much at this point. And providers not taking new patients, and people not signing up for PCPs. And so there were a lot of challenges back in the day. And as you know, the point of service model, when it first came out, it didn't quite work the way we were told it was going to work. It was, run everything through your PCP and everything would be covered in network. So the PCP had a responsibility for steering you to best providers or steering you to specialists within the network. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to do that. This was all new to them. They didn't know who was in network, who was out of network. They had their favorite providers that they like to refer to. So there were
mm,
so many claims that were triggering out of network because PCPs didn't know that they had that responsibility. Employees didn't know that they had to go through their PCP to go to a specialist. You can do change management at a high level, but if you don't need healthcare for a while, then you go to access. It's the same problem today. It's out of sight, out of mind. And what am I supposed to do?
right.
So there were significant hurdles we had to overcome, but we overcame them. And as you know, managed care and point of service plans became pretty much the standard by the mid 90s. And we were one of the first companies to do it. And I ended up going to the company that was the first company to do it.
Wow. One of the it's like the old saying, everything old is new again. What do you think are lessons that you learned from doing that we might be able to apply to the concept of advanced primary care today, where we are trying to find
Mhm.
and activate, aligned interest, value-based primary care that's
Yeah.
integrated with point
Mhm.
solutions and behavioral health, and then use that as a referral mechanism to go not just in network, but to steer to value. What are some lessons learned that we could apply today?
Well, I think the first fundamental is you have to change the financing, how you're paying those providers. Um,
Mm,
you need to have providers to be at risk to some degree to deliver healthcare, and it has to make up at least a third of their practice so that it actually is influencing
mm,
behavior change. So I would say that the financing model, fee for service, doesn't work. Traditional primary care is broken partly because fee for service really doesn't work. They're not. If I'm not going to get paid to do something, I'm not going to do it. I mean, that's just human behavior. Um,
right.
the tools that we have today are much more sophisticated than what we had, if we had any, back then when
Mm,
we were doing this.
yeah.
Everything was paper based. Everything was communication, referral patterns, and everything was faxing and the like. Now there are more sophisticated systems to help providers understand who the better providers are in the market to steer to, because that should, in an advanced primary care model like Firefly, for example, which is an organization I'm very high on in terms of how they're approaching primary care. Um, all that coordination and all of that navigation, as we call it, should be with ideally your primary care team. Um,
Absolutely.
I think they put too much pressure on the primary care physician back then without leveraging the capability of a multidisciplinary team. Your primary
Mm,
care physician was supposed to treat you behaviorally. He was supposed to make referrals. He was supposed to, be the font of all knowledge on all of this. There was no leveraging of nurses, no leveraging of integrate, or no thought of integrating behavioral health specialists in. So I think there were so many lessons learned from managed care when it first came out to what the advanced primary care models are attempting to do today. And I think that financing piece is important because it gives you the flexibility. If I'm at risk, I'm going to do things outside the box that wouldn't normally be paid in in fee for service. The great example that someone shared with me once, where they had an advanced primary care model in place. They had an employee who had was a frequent flyer to the ER. Every week or two they're running to the ER because of asthma issues. And so what they did is they sent a team into their house to assess the environment. They ended up ripping out the carpeting. They ended up changing the filters in their air conditioning. They created more of a clean environment for that individual, and guess what? That person stopped going to the ER, and the consumer was delighted because they didn't have to pay for this. It probably cost as much as an ER visit to do that, or maybe two.
Wow.
They eliminated it, and in a fee-for-service world, that would never be paid for. But in an environment where you own the population health management, and you're trying to figure out, how do I elevate the health of this population, and I'm at risk for that, I'm willing to step outside the box and be innovative and nimble in how I approach this without worrying about how I'm going to get paid. And I think that's one of the fundamental differences, I think, of what the advanced primary care models are trying to do today versus what we told PCPs they had to do 30 years ago. Was it 30 years ago? 30 years ago. I'm really
Wow.
aging myself. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. You're aging well. That's
Well, thank you.
terrific. Looking at this, one of the big challenges we have is where do we refer? When we do have to refer outside the primary care, which we want to do sparingly, how do we know where to refer? We have things like RAND that gives us pricing. There's some transparency pricing that has also been reported. We've got Leapfrog who does safety grades, and then we've got a myriad of different vendors who each have different models to be able to show variations of cost and quality and invasiveness and appropriateness. Where do we start, and how do we know when we're good enough?
Yeah, I think that that will always be a continuous improvement process because we know we're pulling a lot of this from claims, and we don't necessarily have the frontline access to, I would say, what's in the EMR that would be much more impactful in terms of rounding out what you know of provider performance and outcomes and the like. But having said that, I think it's advanced to a point where there are many organizations that have a pretty good idea who the better providers are in the market from an efficiency and from an outcomes perspective. And they have in many respects automated that so they can virtually steer you to better providers. And they can, you can they can even surface better providers in a search so that your top 3 or 4 providers will be those providers that are the best orthopedics in the market, or the best at diabetes management, or whatever the case may be. And so I think the technology is there to support it, and that there's enough data to support and identify the better providers in the market that we can do steerage. And when you arm advanced primary care models with that type of capability, then you're not just referring to the guy I referred to for the last 15 years because he's my buddy and I think he does a good job, and I have no idea whether or not how he stacks up to others in the market, and I'm not at risk for whatever he does. Well, if I'm at risk for total cost of care, I want to make sure this person's going to the best provider who's going to deliver the best outcome at the most efficient cost. So I think when you align the financing and the data and the technology, you're in a much better position to basically say, look, this is not your grandfather's primary care model, right? This is a very different approach to how we do primary care going forward.
I love that. Align the incentives, provide the data. We're all looking at the same data, enable the technology, and wrap it in a continuous improvement process. I love that.
One thing I'd add, Lee, is that 3 years ago at the business group in our Health Innovations Forum, we took a step back and we whiteboarded primary care. We got a design thinking facilitator. We brought all the employers in the room for a day and a half, and what do we want out of primary care? And the impetus behind this initiative had to do with all of the different point solutions taken slices of primary care, whether it was symptom checkers or remote diabetes management, or all of these different solutions coming in, looking to contract with employers. We kind of said, well, wait a minute here. Everybody's taking more and more slices of primary care. What do we really want out of primary care? So
Right.
we brought in a facilitator, and we spent a day and a half focused on that issue and what would nirvana look like. And it had many of the elements that we started talking about. One,
Yeah.
there has to be a different financing model. There has to be an at-risk model in place. That you need the data to help steer people to best providers and the technology to make it easy to do so. That the primary care team should be more than the primary care physician. It should be multidisciplinary and should include nurse practitioner, should include behavioral therapist, access to pharmacist, and healthcare coordinator or navigator, if you will, where navigation took place out of the primary care team for that individual and steering people. And
Mhm.
and it needed to have a much richer benefit, meaning you didn't want plan design to be a barrier to accessing care. So
Right.
employers are willing to accept. Yeah, I think employers will give benefit back if it's value based. Yeah,
Mm.
I think we've reached a point of affordability challenges with the high deductible plans where you've got people delaying care um, or or basically um, avoiding care because they can't
Right.
afford it. So I think
Right.
employers are willing to peel back the high deductible plan and give more back into plan design if it's value based. And I think these advanced primary care models, yeah, going back to first dollar coverage to break down barriers to get access to good primary care. That's also going to steer you to the right specialist or the right facilities. Uh,
Right.
is where these models are going.
Oh, I love that. Taking a step back, we say, okay, well, now this is something we want to put in place. We're going to start taking early steps. One thing you were well known for is that you were a CEO and a CFO whisperer. You were somebody in benefits who had good tactical knowledge around healthcare, but you also spoke to the financial side of the house. Would you maybe share a little bit about how you developed that capability and what are some maybe some instruction on how we might follow?
I think I was fortunate to work for two very engaged CFOs. First, Larry Bossidy, um,
Mhm.
who was larger than life personality, very driven, um, very financially focused, came out of finance at GE. Right?
Mhm.
Following him was Dave Cote. I worked for Dave for 12 years. Um, Same career path, came out of GE finance. Was running another company and came over to Honeywell to run Honeywell. Um, Very strong financial orientation. And the best example can give you is an experience I had my first meeting with Dave Cote. Now, I worked with Larry Bossidy for probably 8 years at that point, so I had a sense. But Larry was more big picture guy. He would give you a target. We would agree on what that target would be. Then he would let you run with it, and off you would go. And he would give you the air cover that you needed. So what was great for both of them, they allowed me to innovate as long as I made my numbers. And what I
Interesting.
did is I flipped it. And it's like, I need to innovate to make my numbers. So,
Mm.
so I think the important thing is they were interested in a particular number. I had to make that number. So I would go in and basically show them the numbers first, not not put it in the back where everything else was foreplay in their mind, getting to what I want to see. So how's this going to impact me? It's like start with the numbers. I needed to demonstrate I was going to hit their number first. Then I would talk about how I was going to get there. And everything was netted out. So everything I wanted to implement that was innovative or whatever I wanted to do, I had already decided what all those things were. And I said, look, if you want me to get to this number, these are the things I need to do, and I can get to that number. So it wasn't an a la carte thing. These weren't programs that sat in my corporate benefits budget that I think, and this is, I think, one of the challenges many benefits people have. If it doesn't fit neatly within the health plan in their eyes, then it's got to sit in my corporate budget. And that's not the place for these. You're managing, you got to look at healthcare like a business. You run
Mm.
your business. Your premiums from your businesses and from your employees are your revenue, and your claims and your administrative expense are your expense. And everything you do to manage that expense should be in that bucket. And that's the way I would approach it. So I would go in with one number and one set of initiatives that would help me get to that number. I didn't show him what every single one of those things cost.
Right.
I talked about, look, you want me to be flat? Here's how I'm going to get there. And
Right.
even the communication costs were in there to roll these things out, any consulting costs that I needed to roll these things out, and the
Wow.
cost of the programs themselves. And the reason I could be successful is that I made everything that I did look like any other financial report our CEO or CFO would look at. So
Interesting.
I made the mistake in my first meeting with Dave Cody of showing him financial numbers the way an HR person would look at financial numbers. And we spent the first 15, 20 minutes trying to decipher what the hell the numbers meant. And, I'm losing credibility as we're going because, there are certain things financially you put in parentheses, which could be a negative number or it could be a net positive number, depending on, how we were showing it was different than the way finance would look at it and trying to explain, was this a positive number? Is this a negative number? And
Right.
we're just losing ground. And, we got a $500 million spend and he's sitting there thinking, I got these HR coconuts running all this money. This is not a good thing. So I started partnering with our CFO, and I realized that there's a set, and most companies probably have this, a set of usual suspects that are in the room when you go to present to your CEO, your CFO, your controller, maybe your top legal person, your communications leader for the company, your CHRO, and then total rewards, benefits, who are driving the presentation or the strategy. And so I would get to each one of them before they came to the room. And I would start with my CFO. I needed to align the numbers the way he would see the numbers, because what my CEO would do, he would look at the CFO and say, are you good with these numbers? And I needed him to nod. All I needed him to do is nod. If he's like, well, I'm just seeing these for the first time, Dave, I'd like to dig into them. You want to get out of the room with the go. You want to be able to go. If it's going to lead to another meeting, you're screwed, right? So
Right.
first I got my CFO on board. And if the numbers needed to be presented a little bit differently, I used the exact same templates, the exact same graphs that I would see in the presentations they would do to the street. So
Really? To
yeah,
Wall Street.
yeah,
So you'd convert the benefits plan into a P&L
yeah, absolutely, because it is a
and use the exact same template that the business would present to Wall Street investors,
right.
and you would present the plan that way with, our income sources sort of on a profit and loss would be, one line item, which is what the business gives us. And the second line item is what our employees give us. That's our total revenue. And then you have the expenses that go out, and then you have sort of a number at the bottom, and you would present it as financials with the same graphs.
Yeah, it was a financial bridge. And I did that because these were slides that our CFO and our CEO were very comfortable with. They were comfortable
Right.
with the format. They were comfortable with the look. So they could focus on the numbers and believe the numbers. And particularly if I checked in with my controller and my CFO first, then we're just having the conversation about where we're going to end up, as opposed to understanding what the numbers mean, because the slides were very familiar to them. The more you can make your slides look like things your CEO has seen before and is comfortable with, you've gotten over a hurdle that I think most people struggle with when they get into that environment.
That has to build trust and got to skyrocket your credibility above
Right.
other people who don't sort of speak that language.
Right.
And then your idea of bringing it to the CFO first, sort of ahead of time, and making sure that you've got kind of there's sort of a pre-wire before the meeting makes enormous sense. I love this strategy, and I've never heard this before.
Here's the other thing I would do. So getting my CFO on board was the first. Second thing, if I felt I was going to get some pushback from my CEO, of the usual suspects, who is the most influential with your CEO, right? Sometimes that is the CFO, right? But in this case, it was our chief general counsel. It seemed like in the room, if you watch the room as to when somebody speaks, who does he listen to the most? It was our chief general counsel. So I would go to her and I would lay out, say, look, here's what I like to do. Dave's going to go here. He's going to want to try to increase deductibles more than we're doing, or whatever the case may be. We're already at a rate where it's unaffordable, or whatever the case may be. I could use your help in pushing back on him, because we're going to get to the number, but he may have some ideas differently in terms of how we're going to get to the number. And I don't want him to think, well, gee, I can get even more out of this if we do what he wants to do as well, right?
Right.
And I've got a great story on that. You talk about pivotal moments in your career. So it's in 2006 or 2007, or 2006 for the 2007 plan year. We're in presenting, and I've got, for the first time, I have a plan to get us flat, completely flat for the year. You know, it just certain things lined up in terms of contract negotiations, some union negotiations, some other things going on that I was like $2 million off, and I told him I'd find a way to get the other $2 million. And so right out of the gate, he's thrilled. We're going to get flat. I don't have the headwind that I'm used to seeing. And I think before we would knock it down, maybe it was a 10% trend, we'd get it down to 3, or we get, you know, we would be significantly below what trend was, but we were never flat. And we do this whole presentation. It's going great. Usual suspects in the room. My healthcare person is with me as we're doing this. And we're right at the end of the meeting. And Dave Cody says to me, love everything we're doing, but I want to make one change. I want to increase employee contributions from 26% to 28%, because that will make them more prudent purchasers of healthcare. And so I said, Dave, that's not going to make employees more prudent purchasers of healthcare. Okay, mistake number one. I'm telling my CEO that he's wrong, right? So there's a series of learnings here as we go through this exercise, right?
Okay.
And he goes, well, really? He goes, why not? I said, well, the decision I make in October about my contributions, that goes into effect as a payroll deduction in January that I never see during the course of the year, will have nothing to do to influence me at the pharmacy in April.
Right.
Right. I said,
true, but how do you,
right. I said,
it's hard to deliver that message.
And he goes, so he said, do you have any data to support that? I said, well, Dave, I have great data that tells me the plan design will influence behavior change. So I give him a bunch of examples. Mandatory generic substitution, we're at 97% generic substitution. Other different plan design changes we made that have had an impact, and I can show that in data. He goes, so what you're telling me is you have no data to tell me that I'm wrong. So I said, I can remember this conversation like it was yesterday, because it was such a, in-your-face discussion.
Sure.
Right?
No, like it'd be
well,
palpable.
Dave, I said, I've got a lot of data that tells me that I'm right. So he goes, so it's your feelings, the hair on the back of your neck, your intuition that you're right. I said, Dave, I'd bet my bonus that I'm right. Right. So great meeting. We're flat for the year. We had a great discussion. I've known Dave now at this point for 5 years, feeling a little cocky. So he said, really? He said, well, I want to study. I want you to get a black belt. We were a Six Sigma company. He said, I want you to look at the difference in healthcare based on premium contributions. We have several businesses that we acquired that weren't all on the same page yet, some are lower. And he wanted to see if the utilization was any different. So I said, fine. And as Dave always says, he goes, how soon? I said, give me 6 months. Because I'm going to need time to pull the data together, get the black belt, to look at the outcomes and all that kind of stuff. He goes, fine. Well, from that meeting over the 6 months, Dave was relentless. Whenever anybody in the room would, Dave, I feel that, he would stop. He'd go, said, Dave, I have nothing to do with Joe's feelings, right? It was feelings this, feelings that. He would just bust our balls about feelings all the time. In fact, my CHRO said, wish Dave would stop busting her ass about this feeling stuff, right? And it didn't matter. We'd be in a senior leadership strategic review, all these leaders in the room. And our chief marketing person would say, well, Dave, I feel that we should, he stopped him. He looks at me. I said, Dave, I have nothing to do with Rhonda's feelings, right? And he's getting the biggest kick out of this because he's poking us every opportunity he can about feelings.
Wow.
So 6 months go by, and I have the data. No correlation between contributions and utilization. So now I have to
that
go,
had to feel great.
well, it did, but now I have to go in and tell my CEO that I'm right and he's wrong, right? And so pull the
Be a
usual,
bittersweet moment. Yeah.
right. So we pull the usual suspects back in the room. And I got my black belt with me who did the analysis and everything. We get into the meeting, and Dave knows I'm right, right? But he wanted to increase contributions anyways, right? At the end of the day, that's what this was about. But
Right.
he said, so were you right? I said, well, Dave, before we get to that, I've got something for you. Now, here's the other thing. Know your CEO. Know their personality, know their style, know what you can do, get away with, and what you can't get away with. So I give him a CD, 10 songs about feelings. Feel like making love, feels like the first time, more than a feeling, feelings, just on and on. And he just loved it, broke the ice. We had the conversation. But there's something else Dave was doing with this whole feelings thing in data. We were going through an HR transformation initiative, and he wanted HR to be much more data-driven, data-focused. So he used me in this example as the poster child for data, not feelings. He wanted people focused on data, not feelings. And this went on well past this 6 months. The feelings thing kept coming up. And fast forward to 2014. I left in 2014. Maybe it was 2015. Patriots, I'm a big Patriots fan. Dave's a big Patriots fan. We go back and forth on games and stuff. We've been to games together. And it was the Super Bowl where Seattle was on the 2-yard line. And instead of running a 1-yard line, instead of running Marshawn Lynch right up the middle for a touchdown, they passed and it got intercepted at the goal line, and Patriots win the Super Bowl. So I immediately sent Dave an email. I said, Dave, you know why Seattle lost the Super Bowl? He goes, why? I said, because Pete Carroll decided to pass the ball based on his feelings rather than going with the data to run the ball up the middle.
That's outstanding.
Yeah. So
What?
Go ahead.
Keep going. You're good.
No, I was going to say he wrote a book a couple of years ago, and he asked me to kind of recast this story for him because he also believes this was focused on the data in trying to get HR to think more data focused. So I laid out the whole story much in the way I just laid it out for you. And he said, boy, you have a good memory. I said, no, I got PTSD.
Yeah. we all can remember those types of exercises when we get put through them.
But going back to the mistakes that I made in that meeting, one of the things I've learned, well, I fell on the sword on that thing because I didn't want to increase employee contributions, but there are other ways of doing it. And I always said, when you want to push back on your CEO or CFO, if they're offering up something that you think is a little too aggressive or out in left field, I would always start with, well, we can do that. So you acknowledge that it's something that we can do, but here are the implications of it. So you don't come across as being defensive or bureaucratic. He hates when you're defensive or bureaucratic. If you're defensive, he goes for the jugular, right? So It's like, we can do that, Dave, but let me give you some examples of what some of the implications could be, and then we can decide what we want to do. And if I would approached it that way, we may have had a different outcome. But I've always approached it that way since then. because there are other
Mm.
things that he would propose that would be just way too aggressive sometimes. And I would say, well, yeah, we can do that. But here are the implications of that.
Everyone, now just a quick word from today's sponsor.
Hello.
Hi, I'm here to pick up a prescription,
Okay. Okay, your total is $80.
but I have insurance.
We ran your insurance. That's just your copay.
Can you hold on to that for me? I'll be back later.
58 million American adults can't afford their prescriptions. Many of these people work for companies just like yours. Start giving your employees 100% medical coverage with Catalyze Health.
So you don't tell him, like, a big difference there that I know I would step into would be, we could do that, but here's why, we shouldn't.
I wouldn't
But
even say it that way.
you don't
I would
put any judgment into this. It's,
No,
let me give you some examples,
of impact.
cause and effect.
Yeah.
That's really smart, and that nuance is something that I can absolutely see myself messing up on relentlessly. This is really interesting.
Yeah. But that,
What else would you have done differently if anything in sort of navigating this sort of the tenacity there with your CEO and CFO?
I think it's only show them what they want to know and have everything else in the hip pocket. Anticipate where they're going to go. Don't give them everything unless they ask for it. I mean, if you're going in with a particular agenda, and you're trying to get at a particular issue, show them how you get to the issue and anticipate all different places they may go, and then put those pieces in front of them if they go there. If they don't, get out. I think that's one. I think the other thing is read the room. Go where your CEO goes. There have been times I've gone in with a presentation, we never even opened a book. It ends up being a full just a conversation.
Wow.
There are other times where if he's flipping through, and the interesting thing with Dave, you couldn't go in and do a slide presentation, because if you did a slide presentation, I control the slides, I control the pace. So he wanted a book that he could flip through, so he could control how fast we were going and where we were going to go. So sometimes you think you're starting at page 1, and we always start at the financials, and we would, but then he may jump towards the back. I want to see such and such, and he's jumping way ahead to something. If I've got the controller, I'm controlling the presentation. He's got to wait for my pace as for me to wait for his pace. And so he always used a book. And I've had different people work for me in healthcare over the years, some great, some okay. And they're trying to hold him and go through every bullet on a slide. And he's getting frustrated. And it's like, I begin to just turn the page. You go where they go. If you need to kind of backtrack at something, you find the right time to backtrack. And then the last thing I would say is learn to fight another day, meaning you take your shot at trying to change their mind. And if you're unsuccessful, find another way to come at the issue, but don't belabor the issue in the room to a point where you're dead in the water with any chance of coming back because you've pissed them off in the process. So I've seen people do that. I've seen people not have enough self-awareness to realize that he's done. Don't keep going there. You
don't keep going.
You feel comfortable for the guy because the guy keeps going. He's like a dog with a bone, and it's like he's done.
You can't keep going. I love that. It reminds me there's an old story about Steve Jobs where when they first presented the iPhone, he said it was, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but he said that's a stupid idea. Why would we ever do that? Plus it would cannibalize our iPod and all these other very, logical business reasons to put the kibosh on the iPhone ever being developed. But apparently the engineers were tenacious about it. They kept bringing it up just sort of sideways and subtly, and they dropped hints and everything, and they eventually got him to come around. And then of course he, you know, it's the brilliant visionary idea.
Right.
To his credit, he did come around, because a lot of people would be too proud to change their mind after they've publicly sort of disparaged something. But kudos to the engineers who kept bringing it up.
I think that iPad, the iPhone example is a great example. I would get asked a lot, gee, why do employers only care about healthcare costs? And said they don't just care about healthcare costs, they care about value. If you think about any employer, any product, any project, any initiative, any innovation, there's a business case and a value equation around that. And value simply is value equals quality plus delivery plus experience over cost. And you can almost apply that to anything an employer will look at. It's in their DNA and how they think about these things. But when it comes to healthcare, what do we get? We get cost information. We get utilization, which is a function of, is a product of cost. It's not a quality measure. It's not a delivery measure. It's not an experience measure. So employers will react and respond to data. And if all you're going to give them is cost information, well, they're going to react to cost information. And the iPhone is a great example, because if you look at when the iPhone came out, and you look at that value equation, BlackBerry was still the pretty dominant player in the market. Both quality products from a quality perspective. Delivery wasn't an issue in terms of getting product into the market in a timely manner. Cost may have been comparable, or maybe the iPhone was a little more.
Sure.
Experience
totally
was
different.
the differentiator. Experience was the significant differentiator. And experience is where quality as well, but experience is where we fall down in healthcare in a big way. When's the last time you've heard any health plan, health system, provider talk about what the experience will be of the consumer coming into their entity? I raised this at a business group meeting once with a number of health plans and health systems in the room, and they all looked at me like a deer caught in the headlights.
They don't understand it.
In the end user's experience and how you differentiate. So even as I look at advanced primary care models, when I talk to them, they need to articulate how that experience is going to be different than what people experience with traditional primary care, and lay it out at a very basic consumer experience level. If you want people to move over, they need to see a difference in what that experience is going to be, not just the cost and hopefully the quality, but the experience itself.
I love this. Employers act in response to data. Effectively, our employers will mirror the employer conversation we have internally will mirror the data that we feed them. If all we bring is cost data, then all we'll ever have is a cost conversation.
Yeah.
But if we report on the experience we're delivering, and we report on the quality outcomes we're generating, then the conversation will mirror back in those terms. It just follows that data. It's an awesome principle. Thank you for sharing that. I love that. How, if you look at new benefits managers who are coming into the space today, many of them might only be on a rotation for a few years or whatever, as they're, in maybe working in HR broadly or whatever the situation is. Maybe they're lifers also, and they're going to have an opportunity to be there long term. What are some of the most important principles or advice that you might share with them?
I would say take a finance for non-financial people course. Maybe you can get it through training through the company, or maybe you get it externally. The interesting thing is Dave Cody asked me to take that course in 2012, when I'd already been working for him for 10 years. And I said, Dave, I can't believe you're asking me to take a finance for non-financial people course. We've been putting data in front of you from a finance perspective for years now. And he goes, you're going to learn things in this course. I want you to take this course. And so I felt I was above the course. but I'll tell you, I learned a lot from this course.
Mm,
There was a lot in it that kind of reinforced what I already knew about the P&L and everything. But there are other elements in terms of levers that you pull from a finance perspective that I wasn't as familiar with, and running through business cases and the like. It was a fabulous course, and I would highly recommend it. Speaking the C-suite language requires you to have a fundamental, a base knowledge of the P&L, of the balance sheet. And if you can position yourself, not only if you're doing a benefits rotation, whether you're in HR, benefits, any other function, that's going to
right.
benefit you, because we're all there to support the business. We're all there to support the company. The more financial acumen you have, the better you're going to be able to speak the language of your business leaders and your CEO. So I would say that's one of the first things. The second thing I would say is take advantage of organizations like Business Group on Health, because that's where your peers come together. That's where you're going to learn from others, both in terms of what's worked and what hasn't worked. When employers come together, they're more than willing to share what hasn't worked as much as what has worked. I've
Right.
always said it's a great group therapy, if nothing else, right?
Ah,
And it is, because you come together with your peers, you realize, hey, they're struggling with the same things we're struggling with, and
mm,
so those organizations, they're great for networking, but they're also great for learning about what other employers are doing, to develop relationships that you can reach outside of your own organization and ask others in your field about, hey, what are you guys doing about XYZ? And those are the two things I would say, whether you're a short-term rotation person or you're thinking of building a career in this side of things, um, that would serve you very well.
no, I love that. This has been incredibly enriching. Uh, Thank you so much for your time, and thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in this week to Broken Benefits. If this has been valuable to you, I know it has been for me. Please send a link to this interview out to friends and colleagues or others who might be able to learn from this as well. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for joining us on Broken Benefits. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or on your favorite podcasting platform. Also, please share today's show with a friend or colleague. It's free to do, and it helps us spread the message to as many people as possible. Until next time.